Hey guys, welcome. In a few minutes, I'm going to be interviewing author Kevin Paul, who's been writing books about haunted Appalachia and Pennsylvania. So grab your snacks and all that good stuff, and we will see you in a few minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening. How is everybody? Yeah, we've got tornado warnings up and down the state of California right now. Go figure. In fact, I think unless they extended it, one just ended at 6 p.m. today. That's big time for California, you know. We're too busy thinking about earthquakes, not these tornado things. But it's been an interesting day, to say the least, weather-wise. Anyhow, welcome everybody. It's Friday for us. It's Friday for California. Technically, it's Friday for California Haunts Radio. As I ready my, you know what I'm going to miss most of all when I actually get a physical producer in here soon is I won't get to push the buttons anymore. Anyway, it's our Friday, but we've got a great guest for you guys tonight. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California. We are 35 strong up and down the state. And if you have any paranormal needs, UFO sightings, Bigfoot, you name it, anything you want us to check out, we do it free of charge. We just take donations. And if we don't have if we don't have anybody located in your city, we will go to the next county and bring people in. We'll always make it a point to come because we try to have someone in almost, every near every major urban area, so we can spread out and go stuff. So like I said, it's all donation. We're here to help educate. We're here to learn too. We're learning along with you. When we investigate your house, we're trying to narrow it down to either being man-made or not being man-made, or there's something we can't explain. And every investigation we go on, we take meticulous notes. Because why? Because that's how we learn. So we're on a learning curve just as much as you are. Okay? Anyway, so yeah, like I said, we work on donation. And as you can see, there's a ticker going down along the bottom, and that's because we do work on donation. And so all our equipment, gas, lodging, computers, hats, headphones, mics, all that comes out of my pocket. So I'm always looking for donations to help keep things going. So if you can find it in your heart at some point to donate to help us keep the show on the air and help us keep our equipment up to date and all that good stuff, I would really appreciate it. So that's at paypal.me/CaliforniaHaunts. Or if you're uncomfortable with PayPal, that's Venmo, and then type in California Haunts, and boom, you're there. But I'd appreciate it. If you're watching from YouTube today, welcome to anybody that hasn't seen the show before. If you're watching from YouTube today, we're looking for more subscribers. I mean, who isn't really on YouTube, right? YouTube doesn't show us enough love, so we're trying to get more subscribers. And the best way to do that is if you're watching from YouTube, down on I think it's the right-hand corner, there's a little ghost with a magnifying glass and a Sherlock Holmes hat on. Click on him. That little ghost will make you a subscriber. And we've got 240 videos of different topics. Last night we had Into the Minds of Serial Killers. So we like to vary what we do here. We might talk to somebody about the history of Coca-Cola. Never boring at California Haunts Radio. Trust me. Okay? Tonight's show, I'm excited. I love the stories that my dad used to tell me about the ghosts in Ohio, because he grew up in Cleveland. And when I got into ghost hunting, he would tell me these stories about that. And he would tell me the stories about, further out, like Appalachia. He used to, when he was in the Coast Guard, he knew people from Appalachia that had been drafted into the Coast Guard. And he used to tell me stories about that. So I'm really excited to have this gentleman on. It's Kevin Paul, author Kevin Paul is our guest tonight. And he's written a couple books on the haunted hollows. So I'm eager to talk to him about that, So without further ado, let's bring our guest in, shall we? Hello, sir.
Hello, Charlotte. How are you?
Very good. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. We don't have tornado warnings. We've just had cold, wet weather. So
I was going to say, you're right in that, for a change, it's out here instead of out there.
Yeah, we're doing a little better than you this evening.
That's
weather-wise.
That's good. That's good. Tell us about you, sir.
Well, I'm a native of Greene County, Pennsylvania. My family's been here since roughly the time of the Revolution. Greene County is the extreme southwest corner of Pennsylvania. We've got West Virginia on two sides of us. So I grew up small family farm, about 248 acres. Went to West Virginia University, majored in agriculture. I've been involved in ag-related careers my entire life, and I'm a lifetime experiencer of paranormal activity.
Okay.
Heard a lot of folklore growing up, so it was wasn't too much of a stretch to to step into reading about the paranormal. A number of years ago, I was became aware of a location here in the county that was extremely haunted, and spent some time there. And saw some stuff that was pretty bizarre. To the point I was a couple of times I was actually close to questioning my sanity. And I heard on the radio one evening the late Rosemary Ellen Guiley was speaking. So long story short, I shot her an email, never expecting to hear back from her. But in fact, I did. We became she and my wife and daughter and I became very close friends. And I worked with her off and on for about 12 or 13 years. It was her idea to do the first book, Haunted Hills and Hollows, What Lurks in Greene County, Pennsylvania. And I had promised there'd be a sequel, and as you probably know, unfortunately, she's passed. So the first book came out in 2018, and the sequel came out late last year. It's titled Haunted Hills and Hollows 2, Still Lurking in Greene County, Pennsylvania.
There we go.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
See, I got you covered.
Yeah, thanks.
How hard was it to obtain the information for these books?
Not as hard as I thought it would be. The first book, we tied a lot of local history in with paranormal activity. I'd heard a lot of stories from my grandmother, particularly as a child, about interactions with one side of the family with the Native Americans that were here when they first got here from Germany. So we were able to tie some of the stories that I'd heard from her of locations where the Native Americans had been in with paranormal activity. And then it was just, small town America. It was word of mouth. You just ask around, a friend of a friend and that sort of thing. Second book was a little easier because people had been aware of the first. And I took a little different approach on it, that a couple of the chapters were a lot longer. So it was easier to do the research because I was focusing on one thing instead of several different phenomena. So that's sort of how they came about.
So what strikes you the most about the ghost stories that are in the phenomena that you have heard about? Is there anything that stands out the most to you?
Well, it seems to me that I made this comment as a joke once a number of years ago that every place is haunted, but actually, every place actually is. When I first started working with Rosemary, she suggested that I read The Hunt for the Skinwalker, which I did. And there's a lot of that activity goes on here, and there was two locations that we searched. One was it's in the first book as in a chapter called The Angry Spirits of the Land. It was a farm with a lot of really bizarre paranormal activity that very much mirrored the Skinwalker Ranch. And then in the second book, I spent a considerable amount of time at the Greene County Historical Society Museum, which at one point had been the county poor farm, and prior to that had been owned by some of my cousins that came here from Germany. So as the years went and months and years went by, I discovered a lot of the same type of activity there. So it's got some high strangeness, not quite as strange as that farm, but it ranks up there pretty high.
Why do you think there's so much activity in that area?
Well, there's several answers. One would be it's Appalachia. I mean, we're sort of the foothills of the Chestnut Ridge. I'm sure you're familiar with stories out of the Chestnut Ridge, Sasquatch and UFOs and all kinds of things. If you look at the folklore aspect of it, which I kind of like to do, we've got a lot of the stuff here that in folklore would lend itself to paranormal activity. A lot of remote places, a lot of mineral extraction industries. There's a lot of abandoned coal mines. There's some unusual electromagnetic activity that pops up. If you're familiar with how Brandon Masulo's work about when traumatic things happen, it sort of sends out a permanent telepathic signal that becomes permanently recorded. We've got a lot of that between the skirmishes with the Native Americans and exploitation of people and poverty. So it's kind of a mixture of things. Not really one thing in particular, but the more I look into this, I sort of think we're kind of a microcosm of the interaction with the spirit world. I think probably most places are as haunted as this. It's just nobody's looked yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then when you think about the Appalachian Mount, up in Appalachia too, I mean, those families go back years and years and years up there. And I mean, they're sitting by the fire, talking about stuff. And there's all kinds of creepy stuff that they've discussed over the years.
Yeah, there's a lot of creepy stuff. A lot of creepy stuff happens to families generation after generation because they're on the same land, for hundreds of years. And it's just part of the landscape. And like I said earlier, we started off looking at places that my grandmother had mentioned where there'd been shouldn't say problems. There'd been some clashes with the Native Americans, but if you take that a step further, then start looking at some of the lore, like involving like fairy lore, and they have favorite trees, or the connection between intersections and bodies of water, and energy production with unusual creatures and unusual happenings. We've sort of got it all here, and I imagine it's that way throughout Appalachia. I know, like I said earlier, the Chestnut Ridge, and I've got some friends in Kentucky that say the same thing. So I imagine in your part of California, if you had time to go look, you'd probably find the same thing. You've got the whole state covered, so obviously the phenomena is there.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and there's places up in the foothills up here with a lot of Native American events went on, and so you end up having to go in, like in your investigations, you have to take a medicine man with you, because it's just Native American land. Even in Sacramento here, as cityfied as we are here, there's areas like over in Rosemont, we did a house that had Native American stuff going on. We had to give peace offerings and stuff to calm the stuff down in the house. So I think it goes on all over it. I agree with you. It's an energy thing, where there's just so much energy and so much horror of what went on, and depression and stuff of what went on. The feelings, it's just so stuck there. The ground's got it. It just absorbed it all.
Yeah, as we say in the second book, what happens to the land happens to the people, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, a place like Appalachia, when the folks have been on the same tract of land for generations, they know the stories, and they've seen this stuff, and a lot of times it's repetitive.
Absolutely. Now let's go back to this farm you were talking about that reminds you of Skinwalker. Why does it remind you of Skinwalker?
Well, it was a much smaller scale, but there were animal mutilations. There were hostile entities. There were shadow people. There was Rosemary and I both saw, and I hate to use this description, but there was a kind of a shimmering entity that put you in mind of the predator in the movie. It was like you could sort of see it because it refracted light, but you didn't actually see it. There was balls of light. Sometimes they were in the house and sometimes they're in the field. A very hostile negative energy. A lot of interference with. We started off doing a sort of a traditional investigation with electronics, and we eventually abandoned it because there was so much interference, and we at that point just resorted to a digital recorder and a couple cameras and intuitive work. But there was something there that dogs would pick up on and were afraid of. Constantly felt like you're being watched. Just that sort of thing. Like I said, it wasn't the scale of the Skinwalker Ranch, but it was a lot of parallels.
I know there's a particular cemetery that we go to practice in that's open at night. And I know there's Native Americans. They're not. I don't know if they weren't allowed to be buried within the cemetery, with the settlers or what, but they're buried along the fence out on the perimeter. And I know they will watch. If you're in there at night, you will get the feeling that you're being watched. They're standing at the perimeters watching us.
Yeah, get some of that. We had some of that there. When I first noticed it, I actually made a comment that I half expected to see Sasquatch step out of the woods. We did have a. I gotta think for a minute. They were Seneca came out, and they warned us about a couple trees we should have avoided, and I didn't take them seriously at first, but by the time we were done, I did. And I got a photograph of it's in the first book. There was a kind of a hostile entity that would show itself in the upstairs windows of the house. And I showed it to an elderly Cherokee woman. It took some convincing to get an audience with her, and she said she wasn't sure what it was, but she knew it wasn't one of theirs. But it was just a lot of hostility. And there we did find some Native American or what appeared to be Native American artifacts on the property. Do a little excavating and you come across these things. So we put them back where we found them, but that seemed to kick activity up
right.
a notch or two.
Right.
It was a bit of a learning experience. I wasn't quite expecting what we got into, but we did the same thing that you had mentioned. Did a peace offering with some Native American tobacco that helped for quite a while, but eventually sort of wore out. I think we just wore out our welcome. We were it was made pretty clear that we weren't welcome there, so
yeah,
we got out of there eventually.
Understood. It's amazing because a lot of writers will just write about places that they'll interview different paranormal groups and then write about the places, but you actually go into places and write about them.
Well, I guess that maybe that's just the way I am. I grew up watching a lot of film noir and a lot of detective movies from the 40s and 50s. So, I'm always wanting to know what's behind the mystery. And sort of a beef I have with some aspects of the paranormal industry is a lot of the investigations that are public are more about the investigators than the entities that they're supposed to be checking up on, and it's sort of like it's backwards. The focus should be on the entity and less on the celebrity. But that's just the world we live in. So I try to tie the history of the place in with the activity. Partly to see if when you investigate these places, you want especially if you get some really unusual claims. You want to, I want to try to make sure there isn't something there that needs, like debunked.
Right.
So you just look into it. And my thing is, I get the history and look at the what's been reported, and then see what matches up with the folklore. That's kind of how I do it.
Very interesting. Now, did you have trouble like up in Appalachia? I mean, with some of the families up there trying to get information from them?
Every now and then there'll be people will promise you information and they won't, they'll back out. Got threatened a couple times. This is in the first book. I was down along the Monongahela River, which is the eastern boundary of the county, on a river trail. It's one of those places that just creeps me out. I just about can't stand it. The place is just, it's got a lot of energy in it, and none of which agrees with me. And this guy walks up to me in I can still see him. He had the old General Motors Goodwrench jacket on, only it looked like it was brand new. And I was down there looking for some stuff because we'd heard some rumors. And this guy just walks up out of the blue and says, people come down here and poke around and stuff that's none of their business, get hurt. And then he walked away.
Oh.
And I couldn't get the camera to focus on him. And it really freaked me out because he had really out of date clothes on, looked like they were brand new. He's a big guy. And like I said, that part of the county, I'm not real comfortable with anyway. So there's that. I was looking into a place. It's in the second book. There's a house that was owned by the Moordock family. And I got some really good information from some of the descendants of the folks that lived there. And then all of a sudden it just stopped. So I'm guessing they figured out what I was up to. Other than that, it hasn't been too bad. You just have to be patient. I found if you ask, you'll get met with silence. But if you're patient and wait for people to come forward, you'll get more information. But then this is, small town Appalachia. So,
oh yeah,
that's how. Yeah, you're from Ohio. You know how it works.
Yeah. My dad, he told me when they would go on leave with these guys, and this is back in World War II yet, but he was shot. He'd never really been up in like Appalachia or any of those areas, and he told stories about you're driving up there and all of a sudden these guys come out of the woods out of nowhere. You're on our land, yada yada yada. He said he couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I still work 3 days a week in natural soil and water conservation work, and there's places we go where there's easements are owned by public entities, and in theory, since I'm contracted out to these public entities, we have right to be on there as long as it's related to the purpose that the easement was purchased for. And we've been challenged several times, and usually it's like 3 or 4 guys and a lot of bad language, and yeah, I've been there. But I usually what'll happen is people will tell you a story. I mean, a really, really good story. And so you jot it down, you get the contact information, say, well, when I'm ready, I'll call you. When you call them back, they've got cold feet. They don't want to talk about it.
Or maybe it's just they don't want you running back up there to poke around either.
Well, I can
understand. You write
that.
it and they will come. That kind of thing.
Yeah, well, you've been there, I'm sure.
Yeah,
you investigate these places, and weird stuff starts happening at home. That was the case with that farm. That was one of the reasons we pulled the plug. Was there's just too much stuff happening to me, and it was starting to get ugly. So we bailed on it. And I know when we were, I was working with a psychic east of here in Armstrong County, Lindsay Miller, and we were looking into some stuff at the museum, and she and I both, and we were chatting on social media. so she's about 2 hours away from here, and we were comparing notes, and the internet. We both lost our internet connection, which you don't really think too much about it, but there's an entity stepped out of the wall here, out of the living room wall, and then she sent me when we got back online. She sent me a video of the room that she works out of, and there wasn't any windows open, but there was a breeze blowing through there because you could see the stuff on her shelves moving. So we sort of we backed off on that one too. We decided that we'd maybe stuck our nose in there a little bit too far.
Right. And I think maybe like with the people in Appalachia too, talking about it, like you say, it was happening to you. Imagine if they start talking about it and this is on their property, and then the stuff starts to increase because they're thinking about it more, and I think maybe that's the fear up there.
Yeah, yeah, and in some cases, it's probably justified. I've talked to there's a couple places here that at least one national and one regional paranormal investigative team, and that's in quotes because it's more entertainment in my opinion than anything else. Came in, and there were some problems afterwards. Ramped up activity, and some of it wasn't too friendly.
Gotcha. So what types of legends come out of the mountains? Like you were talking about Sasquatch, but there's got to be other stuff that they've claimed they've encountered up there.
Well, there is I stumbled across a newspaper article years ago from the 1890s of two guys were hunting not too far from Waynesburg, which is the county seat. And the story in the newspaper was they encountered what we would call a reptilian. So it's a lizard man. That's what we started calling it, and Rosemary and I. So these two guys ran into Lizard Man. They're hunting, and Lizard Man's sort of like the Gorn of Star Trek fame. He's big and strong, but he's not real fast. So he latches a hold of the one guy and like puts him under his arm, and he's carrying him away. So his hunting buddy runs for help, and they track this thing down just as it's about to go into the proverbial hole in the ground. And they're shooting at it and throwing stuff at it or whatever they're doing, yelling at it. So dropships, the human goes down in the hole, and then they collapse the cave in on top of it, and it's never seen again. So we sort of attributed that to one of those stories that was written to sell newspapers in the 1890s. So when I was, we were doing the first book, and I needed a couple stories, and I kept thinking, boy, I wish I had a witness that had, a modern day witness that had seen Lizard Man. And I was in a local market, and I was chatting with a lady that knew that I was working on this book, and I told her the Lizard Man story, and I said, boy, I wish I could run into somebody that had seen something similar to this, especially if it was in Franklin Township. But as it turned out, one of her kids actually had, and it wasn't too far from where these two guys had been hunting. And it was also real close to one of the Native American sites. I don't know if you're familiar with, there's lore all up and down Appalachia about Native American graves where the people that are buried are only like 3 feet tall. Yes. And there's debate on whether or not they're dwarves or if they're kids and this and that and the other. And it just blew me away. And I thought, well, this. It was on the same farm, in fact. And I thought, this is pretty cool. Lizard Man's on the same tract of ground as this one Native American burial site that's very well documented. So Lizard Man made it in the book. And I could say with I'm fairly confident we encountered Lizard Man again because he turns up in the second book associated with artifacts from the Native American graves that came from that same farm that had been stored at the Historical Society. So that's one. Of course, we got the usual urban legends. We've got Crybaby Bridge. There's a really cool local legend of a guy. It's called Stovepipe. There's a lot of different variations of what happens, but the Cliff's Notes version is guy gets beheaded by a train, and he's spending eternity outside the small town of Rice's Landing looking for his head. So you go down there and you do certain things, and Stovepipe will appear. We've got some Dogman stories. I wasn't really on board with Dogman at first because I had read years ago about some of the initial when Bigfoot was seen a lot here in the 70s. There's a big flap especially in Fayette County on Chestnut Ridge. Some of them kind of sort of had canine features to their face, so I had sort of lumped Dogman in with Sasquatch, but we've got some Dogman reports that might actually be that. The witnesses certainly think they are, and I know if you look at it from the folklore standpoint, there's some black shucks here. So we've got some hellhounds running around. I've seen one of them myself. We don't have any Thunderbird sightings here yet that I know of, although they're in the region. A lot of UFOs, a lot of balls of light or spheres, whatever you want to call them. Some men in black every now and then. Black-eyed kids once in a while. That sort of thing. A lot of shadow people.
When you talk about the Hellhounds, can you describe it?
Well, basically, a big black canine on all four, black fur. The color of the eyes can vary, yellow to red. I've seen them on foot going up and down the sidewalk in the borough of Waynesburg more than once. And every now and then see what appears to be an extremely large wolf, but it's not the same as the hellhound. There's a couple reports of hellhounds at the Historical Society, which sort of helped us nail down what we think some of the non-human activity is there. I think some of it is related to what the Muslims call jinn, and that's one of the favorite forms they like to take is a canine. And also in the second book, I had a personal encounter with this is one of those stories. It's one of those things I never. I mean, if somebody told me when I was 30 years old I'd be talking about this, I would have laughed at him. I had an encounter with an Irish deity, the Morgan, and she's accompanied by a rather large dog sometimes. And every now and then I see him by himself.
That's interesting. I mean, you must have psychic abilities, or you wouldn't be seeing these things.
Yeah, I got a lot of folklore from my grandparents, especially my grandmother, and her thing was just because somebody says it and it sounds unbelievable doesn't mean it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember talking to her about the oh man, my mind just went blank. The Hopkinsville Goblins, I think it was in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just a kid, and it was the story was retold on the local papers. And I said, what's going on with this? And she kept coming back to, well, they were shooting at something. And, you live in the country and you don't have a lot of money. You don't load a 30-06 and start shooting at stuff because it's expensive. And, and weapons aren't toys, it's something you need.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, think outside the box and accept the folklore. So you grow up like that, and then I'm pretty sure my dad had some. I've seen shadow people most of my life, and I never said anything to either. I never mentioned it at all to my mother. She was very everything was factual. She was very factual. And towards the end of my father's life, I mentioned it to him about seeing shadows, and he said, "Yeah, that he'd seen them." And I said, "Well, I thought when I was a kid, I thought everybody saw them." And he just said, "Oh no." So yeah, I guess I am. I used to think I could read people. My off-farm job for years was retail because you could make good money at it. And I thought I learned to read people from working retail, but I think I was reading people because I was actually reading them.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and after I started working with Rosemary, and she was the one that was saying, just clear your mind and sit down and listen, and and start you record your dreams and that sort of thing because dreams have meaning. And just like that encounter with the Morgan, there was like 2 years of dreams that led up to that made absolutely no sense at all till I sat down and read some Morgan lore, and then it was just like, oh my God. It's like jinn stuff. You read about the jinn and you realize, you've bumped into them a lot. You just didn't know what they were.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the thing with Morgan interests me because you had those dreams that didn't make sense. What possessed you to even do any reading on Morgan?
Well, I started encountering people in real life that were appearing in dreams. And in the dreams, I categorized them as aliens, but they weren't like they were more like what Keel would have called ultra terrestrials. And the first one was I'll show my age here. The first one looked like a Vietnam War era hippie girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran into her in broad daylight in real time one day. Just about floored me. And she'd been in these dreams, and then it changed, and I started seeing this woman dressed from antiquity that was. She wasn't hostile, but she's very businesslike, very, very feminine, a lot of feminine energy, and dignified. And she was trying to communicate with me, and she would hand me things that had what looked to me like runes written on them, a lot of a lot of geometric shapes. And I realized one day, after one of these dreams, that I was seeing this woman, and she was Celtic, and I've got some Scotch Irish. I'm Scotch Irish German. Mm-hmm. But it still wasn't making much sense. And again, I was at work one day, broad daylight. There was another guy with me. This is detailed in the second book. And this woman steps out of the woods with this great big black dog. And I thought, once again, I was floored. And I asked my associate what he saw, and he saw a completely different woman than what I did. So this is something else I'd worked with Lindsay with. And I got home and I fired off a message to her, and there was a lot of other things that were Morgan related. I was encountering crows. I was having dreams about cattle. I didn't put that in the book. A lot of dreams, Morgan's associated with horses, dogs, cattle, all kinds of stuff was coming up in these dreams. And it wasn't till I was talking. Lindsay was the one that actually convinced me to look into the Morgan, because this was another thing I thought I was like off my rocker. Mm-hmm. And I purchased a book and started reading about it. And I thought, yeah, this is who I'd run into. And it was a little bit of a panic for me, because I was raised Christian, and the Morgan offers you a contract. And in my case, I don't think this is in the book, but what she handed me was essentially a wedding invitation. And I was like, oh, no.
No.
Somebody, sorry, I'm spoken for. But I was taking it out of context. And so we kind of worked that out. And I just said, and I talked to a couple of people that were far more schooled in this than I am. And they said, well, you just have to sit down and say, boy, thank you very much, but I can't. And here's why. And so I explained it, thinking again, well, either this will work or I'm nuts or it'll cause problems, but it hasn't caused any problems. I still see her every now and then. And things are cordial. But it's just one of those things, if I hadn't been raised or influenced to accept folklore, then none of this would make any sense whatsoever. It just would have been bonkers.
Did you find that when you first started to go out to look around, that it's like the doors opened for you? And then you were starting to get flooded with all this different stuff coming into your house, and these feelings about.
And some of it was inexperience. I'd read a lot about it, but I never really quote unquote investigated anything. And so I made some mistakes. One of which was, you got to protect yourself before you start. So, in addition to prayer, I use 4 Thieves vinegar. It works. Everybody's got their thing. There was one thing Rosemary told me. She said, well, whatever your belief system is what you should use. So that's what I do. And because there again, Appalachian folk magic and Protestant Christianity. So I got the 4 Thieves vinegar and, prayer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you think is one of the most common seen entities in your area?
Other than the usual ghosts?
Yeah.
Well, this is based on over 2 years looking into the museum, and 3 with Rosemary at that farm and a couple on my own. I'm becoming more and more convinced that, well, yes, there are human hauntings, and yes, I have seen apparitions of humans. A lot of people are seeing things that they're attributing to ghosts that are actually a different part of the spirit world. And then you get into things like, and you can put whatever label you want to put on it. Fairies, leprechauns, some people say fallen angels, jinn, whatever you want to call it. These things have been around forever, longer than we have.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's sort of like the debate in the Bigfoot community. Is Bigfoot flesh and blood, or is he interdimensional? Well, I'm becoming increasingly convinced that if you're someplace where there's a ghost and you have poltergeist activity, then you're actually dealing with interdimensionals other than deceased humans. So I don't know if I'm answering your question or not.
No. I'm just saying. I was just thinking about what you were saying, and and the more I read alien abduction encounters,
yeah,
and what happens after the fact, not during the abduction, but after, it makes me wonder, because of the EVPs we get, because the EVPs do not. I mean, once in a while you'll get one that sounds like somebody's voice, but the rest of the time, they're such low frequency, they're so far off, or they're garbled, or they sound mechanical. So it makes me wonder if we're not picking up either something that's interdimensional or it's aliens.
Yeah, I agree. That's, and I hate to use the word problem, but I'm really skeptical about EVPs, because there's so many of them in pop culture. Okay, I'm Joe Blow and I'm going down the hall of this haunted place, and there's an EVP, and instead of letting you hear it, they put on the screen what it says. which blows it for me. I did. There's a couple guys that underwent hypnotic regression to relive encounters with UFOs, and I did the same thing with the same person to try to get a better memory of something that happened to me. And heard this really strange sound, like right when you're sort of leaving this consciousness and going into the next one, where you actually relive this stuff. It was just this odd sound that would come up, and you had to, like, once you got through it, then your memory would unfold. And I was out at the museum. This would have been 2020, I think, 2020 2020. And there was a team out there that was a small group. They're not nationally known. They're just people are actually pretty serious about it. And they had recorded some sounds that they didn't recognize. And they had recorded, and they said, "Have you ever heard this before?" And I said, "Yeah, I heard that when I got hypnotized." And I think you're right. And there again, you get into the trickster element. If you want to hide in plain sight because, you don't want people poking around, then you can let them think they're talking to, Great Aunt Till that died in 1929. And in reality, they're talking, they're hearing something else.
Right. Do you also think, and this is a theory that my friends, the Constantinos, were putting out there, was that there's a particular restaurant up in Auburn, up here, and that's claimed that there have been ghosts in there for years, but then other information came out to say that there aren't really ghosts in there. It's the ghosts that people wanted to be there. So many people had gone in there looking for particular ghosts that they left an imprint themselves.
I've read that. Not that particular place, but people will go out with intention and they will find what they're looking for because it's their intent. And that's entirely possible. And I don't know how you would prove it one way or the other. It would take a lot of time, but it'd make a fascinating project.
And that's what my friends were working on up each other's desks. So like you say, it's a fascinating project because they were able to put they were able to create voices and everything that were coming out of the building itself, wherever they were from, wherever they were sitting.
Really?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So it's
just from intent.
Yeah. Do you think that the people in Appalachia now? I mean, there's got to be a lot of different legends up there. I mean, they're in the middle of the. I mean, it's lonely up there. It's dark at night.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder. I mean, did you hear more ghost stories up there as opposed to other stuff?
When I was younger, heard ghost stories. And it was one of those deals where you'd be driving down the road and everybody knew, you go past it, everybody knew this house is haunted. Or like Stovepipe. Everybody knew if you went to Rice's Landing, you could run into Stovepipe. And then when I got into high school, and this was in the early 70s, there was the big UFO flap. And, Bigfoot was seen all over the place, and especially in the Chestnut Ridge and to some extent here. And so there's been a wider variety, but there again, like you'd mentioned, intent. No, 20 years ago, Dogman, like I said, I thought was just part of the Bigfoot phenomena. But when when Linda Godfrey's The Beast of Bray Road came out,
right. Beast of Bray Road, yep.
And then. So I've talked to a couple people here that are very credible, and I believe that they saw, essentially what was a dog man. Now the question is, one of them, the one guy definitely is not into Dogman. I mean, he wants nothing to do with it. Doesn't want anything to do with paranormal. But if you go out with the intention of seeing Dogman, yeah, it's entirely, you might see one just because you're suggesting it to yourself. I don't know, but it seems like I don't look into human hauntings as much. I'm more interested in the spirit world, as in using folklore to interpret cryptid sightings.
Sure.
But there does seem a little bit of everything in Appalachia.
Now, when you talk about the cryptid sightings and the folklore, how were you able to put that together?
Well, read a lot of other people's work. And you had touched on this earlier about the abduction experiences. And I've talked to someone that wasn't abducted, but had a very close encounter with a UFO in their youth, and has been plagued with really disturbing paranormal activity, not life threatening, but the kind of stuff that it just like never quite leaves you alone. And when Rosemary was alive and she was here and we were looking into that farm, was when I had first heard about gin, and initially it was a hard sell for me because I had the Western concept of genie in the bottle. But if you read, she did a book. She did a couple books on gin. One, her co-author was kind of discredited, but she did 2 books that had material from Greene County in them about gin. The second one's called The Gin Connection. It's out of print now. And I was afraid to read it for quite a number of years. In fact, I had it, I think it came out in 2013. And I just read it this past year because I was afraid to read it. But reading it, I didn't realize that's when it really clicked to me what she was talking about. That a lot of this stuff, regardless of what label you put it on it, which depends on what your culture is all coming out of the spirit world. Because you can take Bigfoot's big and hairy and he smells bad. Well, gin can do that.
Right.
Hellhounds, gin can do that. You go into these places and people they're hearing strange sounds like clicks, whirs, buzzing, disembodied voices that speak in gibberish, just all kinds of stuff. It's gin. Or you can substitute fairies. I need to quit saying the word fairies because I read where they don't like to be called fairies. They preferred things like to be called the gentry. So, and there again, that's something else. If somebody told me when I was 30, I'd be talking about fairies, I would have howled. But I really think that's the key. What a lot of investigators miss is they're kind of caught up in what their devices are telling them. But the spirit world a lot of times communicates in metaphors, so they can be telling you something and we're completely misinterpreting it. And there again, I don't use I use very, very little in the way of electronics. I have a digital recorder they use sometimes, and a camera and a couple trail cams, and that's it. The rest of it's leg work and intuitive work and dowsing and that sort of thing. And I noticed over long-term investigations in 2 different places that the entities that we initially thought were human would shut off the same devices every time.
Mm-hmm.
that were battery powered, but leave other things alone that were battery powered. And it kind of bothered me. Um, it didn't make any sense. And I was reading a couple articles on the gin, and it talked about them being made up of electromagnetic energy or plasma or energy.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I read referenced were, and I've heard investigators say this, well, leave your computer on or leave the TV on and it'll interfere with the entity. So my thought is maybe it is, and a lot of people, at least here on the East Coast, people say, well, the entities need the power from the AA batteries so they can manifest themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten to the place where I don't think that's the case. I think the problem is the device that the batteries go dead is annoying the entities. Therefore, they drain it because not all types of not all types of energy are compatible.
Mm-hmm.
So if what we're talking about are ultra terrestrials as opposed to deceased humans, then it could be a case of like, country A is jamming country B's radar. So what we think we need to observe the spirit world might actually be at minimum annoying and at maximum harmful. So that's I'm not sure how I'll prove that, but that's my theory.
When you talk about fairies, and I've been doing this almost 25 years, maybe more. I run into 2 cases involving fairies. The first one was in a house in Folsom. The last one we did was a couple of years ago, and it was to me. I'm like you when it came up the second time. I didn't expect it, and when the psychic said, "Well, it's the fairies that are causing this," and I thought, seriously? I was kind of incredulous. But then as the
Yep.
investigation went on, it made more and more sense, as to what was going on in the house. That it was in fact the fairy folk. But when you first come in contact with the fairies, your mind doesn't want to believe that.
Yeah, and you've been taught that they all look like Tinkerbell, and that
Right.
they all just flitter around and they put frost on flowers,
Right.
and then you read the lore. It's like, well, you don't want to like make them angry because they're tad wrathful if they're
Yeah.
provoked. And um, the last encounter I had with them, I was walking past uh, some landscaping, and there was some discussion as to what kind of Christmas lights should be put up. And I heard clear as a bell, like a group of voices saying, "We would like red lights."
Nice.
And I was like, Roy, red would look really good here. And and that's what they put up. But yeah, I never imagined I'd be going there. But then, I can talk about, but the parallels between them and the jinn and the leprechauns and you name it.
Right.
It's cross cultural. It's spiritual. And I think some of this stuff people don't want to talk about because, like in the case of the Morgan, or in the case of
Right.
the jinn, or the case of fallen angels, um, you've the information's coming from religious sources, which I don't have any problem with, but
Mhm.
some people just gets their hackles up, or they get defensive,
Mhm.
or they're uncomfortable. But again, you grow up on a farm in rural Pennsylvania, um, when you have to adapt to nature instead of pushing your way through it. It's not a stretch for me, but I can see where it would be for a lot of people.
And the
And
other thing you haven't mentioned yet, we come in contact with these things, and I'm sure you do up in the coal mine area, the Tommyknockers.
well, I'm familiar with the Tommyknocker story. The Tommyknocker reports I've read were east of here, and this was bituminous country, and they were more around the anthracite mines. Um, there's some similar stories There's the Puckwudgies and the All Bat Witch. But here, haven't
Not
had
you, it's me.
no worries. Haven't had if the stories are here, I haven't heard them yet. But yeah, I'm familiar with the lore.
I hear you. It's not you, it's me. I don't sleep well at night, so
Listen, I get
Tommyknockers
it.
are interesting because sometimes they can either be aggressive or they can be mischievous. This house we did up in near Placer, near Camino, they would come into the house and they would see them in the house, dressed in their little mining outfits, and they would steal things in this guy's house. Very mischievous, move stuff around. But then you hear the other stories about how if you go into the mine and you meet up with one, that means there's going to be a mine collapse and all that. But I agree with you. The lore part of it's fascinating, and I admire you for doing that. I admire you. I admire your books because I think it's absolutely fascinating to look into that kind of lore.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. It seems old fashioned to a lot of people, but if you've got 20,000 years of Native American stories explaining something, and Appalachian folk beliefs, you could accept that because the Indians say it's true.
Right. There's got to be something to it.
Yeah.
There's got to be something to it. Well, when you look at even the story of Jesus's birth,
right.
I mean, even the Native Americans over here saw the star. Everybody saw this star. Everybody knew something great had happened. It's just it was written down differently for each religion.
Right.
So it all makes sense. Just like the aliens, if they were with the Egyptians, certainly the aliens were here. Like you talk about the reptile guy,
right.
being buried around the Native Americans. So certainly, if the aliens were visiting ancient Egypt, they were sure as heck coming everywhere else.
Oh, I agree.
Sir, thank you. This hour went by really fast.
This was a quick one.
Yes, I thank you for coming on.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. I've enjoyed this. I've watched several of your shows and have really enjoyed them.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
And how can people reach you, sir?
I can be reached. I'm not a tech guy, as I said earlier, so I'm pretty old-fashioned. Email hauntedgc, as in haunted Greene County, at yahoo.com. I'm on Facebook under my name, Kevin Paul, or I can also be found on Facebook, Haunted Hills and Hollows. That's it for now.
That's what I get for not sleeping at night.
Listen, I'm right there with you. No worries. I may do it. I may get into Twitter one of these days. I don't know. I'm not a tech guy. I'm more of a gearhead than a tech guy.
Absolutely. Well, I would love to have you on again to talk more about this stuff because I can talk about black-eyed kids and all that stuff till the cows come home. Because there's just so many legends out there and it's stuff that people don't even know about.
I'll come back on anytime. So anytime, just give me a holler. I just appreciate the opportunity to talk to someone on the West Coast. It's just a treat for me.
Well, I didn't blow away, so I guess the tornado thing's off.
Yeah, well, let's hope not.
But then again, I am in a closet doing the show, so I probably wouldn't know. I'll probably step out, the whole house will be gone. I don't know.
Yeah. My biggest concern, there's a border collie here in the room with me, and I was afraid she's going to be opening and closing the door behind me while we were talking to the.
There you go. I used to have a Kelpie when I was in the other office. I used to have a Kelpie that would sleep under the couch in there when I was doing the show. And people would be like, I can hear something in the background. There's heavy breathing. And I'm like, it's the dog. Or she'd snore right when I was on the air. It was pretty bad.
Yeah.
It was cute. But I mean, especially if I was doing a thing about EVPs or something, and then people would get all alarmed because they thought I had a ghost in the house. So.
And an angry one at that.
An angry one at that, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, sir. Have a great rest of your evening. And have
You're welcome. Weekend. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good one.
You too.
All right, guys. That was a fun show. I learned a lot about Appalachian stuff. I'm always curious about those areas because I know there's a lot of old folklore and legends up there, Anyway, tomorrow, of course, we're not here. We're closed tomorrow. However, Sunday we're back. We're going to be reading the Mojave incident. Again, that'll be 6 p.m. Sunday. We're back at our usual time. Monday, author James Stewart's going to be with us to tell us about the ghosts and the mystery of Blue Sea Cottage. So he's going to be on with us Monday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Okay? You want to check us out, people that are still watching, CaliforniaHauntsRadio.com. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated us, share it with 5 of your enemies. We're equal opportunity here at California Haunts Radio. See? And do subscribe to our YouTube page. More subscribers, the merrier. Again, I'm not saying we're not a profit. We do go out and do ghost hunts and stuff, and we do not take money to do them. We do all it to simply help people. So all the equipment you see here, all comes out of my pocket. If you could find it in your generous hearts to kind of help me out to keep things going and keep the show on the air, I'd really appreciate it. PayPal.me/CaliforniaHaunts or Venmo, and then just type in California Haunts. And I'd appreciate it because, something breaks like the headphones or the computer or something. I've got to somehow come up with a bunch of cash to fix it all or buy a new one to replace it so I can keep the show coming. This is what I do. I'm a journalist. I'm a photojournalist. This is what I do. So, this is it for me. All right. And I enjoy doing it. Anyway, I'm going to bug out. It's Thursday night, and I want to see if the house blew away or anything while I was on the air. But thank you, everybody, for coming, and I will see you on Sunday afternoon. Bye.